that's due tomorrow. And you might also be thinking, I'm worried that it might not be too long before the teacher starts emailing me about missing assignments. But I want to pause for a minute and imagine that this year is different. That this year, your kids know what's due and when it's due. They can submit their work on time. They can find their materials without scrambling. And it is all possible if you have the right systems and supports in place. So what does that mean? Well, a system is a way of going about something that's regular and consistent. It's just not a quick fix. I know that these things can be done because I've been doing this for a long time. I started out my career, as Lisa mentioned, as a special education teacher in Fairfax County Public Schools. And since 1998 at Educational Connections, we've been helping kids to improve their executive function skills. And that's important because when your child has ADHD, it often manifests itself as difficulty with those executive functions, like staying organized, planning ahead, and starting on time. And we know that we can bolster executive function skills. We can't fix them to be perfect, but we can make them better by instituting regular processes, consistent plans to help support students. So let's start out with the first thing that I mentioned, and that's organization. At the start of the school year, everybody's actually pretty organized. You probably took your child to that really fun Target trip where you got a new backpack for your student. They have a brand new binder, probably some beautiful color-coded folders. But I want you to think back to last year, a couple months into the school year, maybe around Thanksgiving time. What did your child's backpack look like? Well, it probably had some crumpled up papers in the bottom of it. And if their binder is in their backpack, you probably noticed that papers are sticking out in every direction. And those lovely color-coded folders that you bought your child at the beginning of the year, well, they're unused. We want to prevent that from happening this year. So one of the first things when it comes to getting organized is actually figuring out where your child is going to do their studying. Now, the reason I ask, what grade your child is in, because it helps me understand the work level of your student. And for a lot of kids that are in elementary school, they may not have much homework at all, but that's okay. They can still have a study space, and I recommend it. For a really young child, the study space shouldn't be in their room or in a, maybe another place in the house where you don't have earshot. It should be kind of near you. So even if they have something little to do, encouraging them to do that work in the study space, hopefully not one by a TV or other distractions, would be great. Now, having a study space is one thing, but really what helps the most is having a space that's optimized for focus. And if you have a young child, you can still do this with your student. The reason having an optimized space is important is that if it's not, kids can be so distracted when they're doing their work. But it can't be that you design this for your student or you tell them what to do. They need to have buy-in. I really believe in something called metacognition. It's somebody's ability to understand reasoning and thinking. And that's what really we want to help students with. It's kind of a sense of self-awareness. In my company, we work with a lot of kids with attentional issues, and we have hundreds of tools that we use with them. But one of them that I especially like is called the Focus Finder. We do our work with kids online, and it ends up really being so helpful because it's super flexible with scheduling, but also it's really interactive. And sometimes parents think, oh, kids can't do work online. Honestly, maybe that Zoom classroom wasn't great for them with 25 kids a few years ago, but this is different. We use an interactive platform called Lesson Space that is designed for educators. Zoom is designed for businesses. It's not ideal for kids. So this Focus Finder, we pull it up on the screen and you can see it in the slide. And it's like a Venn diagram. And at the top, it has things that could be helpful to your child's focus or could be distracting. For example, what's helpful? Is it that your child needs total silence or maybe not? Do they need bright lights or that doesn't matter? If they have a phone, should their phone be next to them? Should it be in airplane mode or should it just be in another room? So having a discussion with kids about what helps your focus and what hurts is so valuable. And kids are honest. And we want them to share with us, what's going to be helpful and what's not. And when they have that self-awareness and they have a say in what their space is going to look like, it's a complete game changer. By the way, if you want to use the Focus Finder in your home, you can. And I put all the resources I'm going to talk about today in one place for you. And if you go to ectutoring.com/webinar-resources, you can find the Focus Finder and all the other things I'm going to talk about this morning. All right, so it's one thing to have your space. You want to optimize it for focus. But when it comes to organization, it's not always just about stuff. It's also about time, which we're going to talk about. When it comes to stuff, though, what often happens is that students will not have a system for staying organized. And if you leave them to their own devices, you know this about their room, you go into it 2 weeks later and it's a complete disaster. But what if you had a system so that, every few days or once a week, there's a way to keep it organized? And that type of thing is really helpful for kids because it prevents complete mayhem and you getting upset as a parent. Oh my gosh, this is a complete disaster. It's like starting all over again to get it organized. So one way you can prevent that is with a family strategy called the clean sweep. So the clean sweep is a 20-minute block of time. You can do it once a week. You can do it twice a week. Once a week is, often enough. That once a week time is not just for your messy kids. It's for everybody in the house, parents and all the kids. And during this time, and I recommend piggybacking it or habit stacking it against something else you already do. Maybe you already have dinner. Usually I have a family dinner on Sunday night. Have this right after. And during this time, turn up the music to make it fun. You might be organizing the junk drawer in your kitchen, but your older kids can be organizing their digital documents, cleaning out their backpack, organizing papers in their binder. Younger kids, tidying up their study space. All these things help kids to stay organized. And you want to habit stack it, as I mentioned, piggyback it to something you already do. Now, as I mentioned, organization is also about time. So when we work with kids in our sessions and they have longer term assignments like a book report or an essay, we teach them to break it down into kind of like backwards plans. So they're not waiting until the last minute. You can use the same concept of planning ahead as a family strategy with something I call a launching pad. So a launching pad is really a bin. It can be a box. It can be like an old dishpan. It doesn't really matter. Ideally, it goes by the door from which your child is going to exit in the morning. And the night before, you say to your child, okay, let's get the launching pad ready. That means all the papers, all the homework are in the binder. The binder is in the backpack, and the backpack is in the launching pad. And so are the musical instruments, the sports equipment, whatever needs to go to school the next day. Your child is going to be leaving the house in an organized fashion. They're basically going to have a smoother morning so that they're going into a new school day in an organized way. So what I found is that things like clean sweep and the launching pad are things that parents can do because they help with routine. Maybe pick one and start there if organization is an issue for you. If you have a child who constantly butts heads with you, it may be that you want to work on the other things that we talk about, more of the study skills, perhaps with an executive function coach. We found that with coaching, kids need regular sessions, once a week or twice a week. But anyways, all these things bring me to the fact that they are routines. They have to be done consistently so that they become habits. And if you're interested in habit formation, like I am, because I think the science behind it is so interesting, how we create something and stick with it. One of our executive function coaches, Rachel Moss, who's actually doing a webinar with me today at 2 o'clock on anxiety. She's amazing. She wrote this ebook called Get Into the Habit with Your Kids, 3 simple ways to create new habits and strengthen others. And it's at the site I mentioned, ectutoring.com/webinar-resources. So that's a little bit about organization. Let's talk about prioritization. As kids get older and they have multiple things to do, not just, read at night for 20 minutes, but they may have homework in multiple subjects, prioritization is often really difficult for them. But if we can teach them skills that help, it makes all the difference. So here's what often happens when kids have multiple things to do and they prioritize them ineffectively. They put the things that aren't that important in the beginning and they run out of time for the things that are really important. This is a form of procrastination. So let's say that if you can see these jars, if you're online and you're watching the slides, you can see that the one on the left has just sand. The one in the middle has sand and pebbles, and the one on the right has sand, pebbles, and rocks. And you notice that everything does not fit into this jar. Let's say for a student, the sand represents things that they love to do, but that really aren't conducive to getting their work done. For example, maybe scrolling through their phone or binge watching their favorite show that just dropped on Netflix. The pebble represents something that they have to do. But maybe it's not graded, so they don't put so much weight to it, like math homework. And then the rock is something big. It counts for a lot of their grade, and it's really important. And it usually takes more time than just, a half an hour to get done. It might take multiple sittings. We're going to call that a rock. So a rock could be like a big essay, a science lab, a book report. Now, when kids prioritize sand first, we can see that it doesn't really work. They run out of time. However, what would it look like if they prioritize the rocks first? If all they did was shift the order and start with rocks. So now you got rocks, then you have pebbles, and we want to make sure they have the sand because that's important to kids. Oh my gosh, everything fits. And when we share this strategy with kids and they see a visual, they're like, oh, okay, I get it now. So basically, it's not any more work for me. I'm just switching up the order. Yeah, that's all it is. It's just starting with the rock. So I feel like the rock, sand, pebble idea is just so, so helpful for kids. And it's not just when kids are, in K to 12, but oh my gosh, when kids use this as they go off to college and they prioritize those important things first, it's a total game changer. When we work with kids in sessions, the first part is always, how are you? How did your week go? What worked? What didn't? We want to touch base on things like organization, make sure they're on track. But really, the bulk of the work that we do is we want to figure out, all right, what do you have due? And let's prioritize that work. Let's look at your rocks, your pebbles, and put those onto your calendar. A lot of kids will work in a calendar, an electronic calendar. Sometimes they won't, and they will work in a pencil and paper assignment book. Some kids won't even do that, but they're willing to make lists. Some kids will use Post-it notes. Our goal is to figure out what they're willing to do. Because if you say, you can only use your assignment notebook, this is what the school issued, this is what you have to do, and you have a resistant kid, all bets are off. So we basically want to answer 2 questions for kids. What do you have? And then when will you do it? When are you going to fit this in your day after school? We help them tackle the most dreaded assignment, the one that's going to be hardest for them, so we can teach them strategies for overcoming that feeling of, I don't want to do this, so that when they're on their own, they can tackle stuff on their own. And then lastly, we want them to know how to anticipate obstacles. And this is a big one for kids with ADHD. They're often super optimistic. I had a kid once tell me, Mrs. Dolin, he had a 5-paragraph essay to write. I said, oh, how long do you think it will take you? Say, oh, Mrs. Dolin, I can totally do this in 15 minutes. I'm like, really? Tell me about that. And he's like, oh, I can just do 10 minutes per paragraph and boom, I'm done. But I said, oh, did you already research the topic? Oh, wait, I haven't done that yet. And did you still need to write a thesis sentence? Oh, right. Uh-huh. And so once we started talking about it, the reality set in, like, oh, wait, I underestimated that. It's going to take me longer than I thought. So an obstacle would be, not being realistic about time, but it can also be, oh, I'm on this chat with my friends and it just sucks me in. Or I had this sports banquet on Wednesday night and I don't know if I can get all this done. That could be an obstacle. Okay, let's troubleshoot it before you get into that situation, which is key. Anytime kids have a strategy before the problem presents itself, they're more able to tackle it. So we'll go through Schoology in Fairfax County and we'll figure out, all right, let's look at what you have due. And so Schoology will populate their assignments, but what it doesn't do is break it down to, all right, you've got, a test on Friday. How are you going to study for it? Let's add that in. But this allows us to see what they've got going on. And then we help them drill down into each class. All right, let's see. What do you have for English? Oh, did you get a rubric for that? Let's look at that rubric together to making sure that they understand the assignment. And when you work through it, they're being accurate in their work. The other thing I mentioned is about time estimation. And here's another tool for you. This is a time estimator tool. And this is what it would look like if we're online with a student and we're sharing screens. So we'll pull up the time estimator tool in lesson space and we'll talk about it with the student. And in this one, the way we teach estimation of time, and by the way, this is so important because you're going to get the kid that, like the essay example I gave you. But just in general, I would say kids really overestimate how much time they have and they underestimate how long it's going to take them to do something. And so we want them as young as possible to get a sense of time and, how long is it going to take you to do this? By the way, I would recommend, and there's some research on this, if your child has difficulty with time, and you say, hey, we're leaving in a half hour to go to soccer practice, and they're like, don't have a sense of what that is, get an analog clock and keep that in your house because the hands on the analog clock, they help the kids to understand elapsed time a little bit better. And so that might be something you can have in your home. But this tool has things like, okay, how long do you think it's going to take you to write the alphabet backwards? And what kids will often say is like, oh, I can totally do that in 30 seconds. And in a session, we'll say, okay, awesome, let me time you. And it's usually a couple of minutes. And we'll have a discussion over it. We might say, okay, how long will it take you to list out today's schedule? 2 minutes. It usually takes much longer than that. So it's through these fun things with kids that they start to get a sense of how long, that they might want to increase the time they're allotting for themselves. We will do it with their work as well. How long do you think it will take you to do these 3 math problems? Let me time you. It's a valuable skill again, because when kids can better estimate how long something's going to take them, they're less likely to run out of time. And that brings me to our next subject, which is procrastination. I think we all live with a procrastinator, and I know I do. I have difficulty with this from time to time myself. It's super common. Here's the thing. There's 2 types of procrastinators. There's functional procrastinators and dysfunctional procrastinators. So functional procrastinators are the kids that might have an assignment due on Friday, and they wait until the last minute on Thursday night to start it. And they're stressed out, but because they have a lot of adrenaline flowing, they're able to focus well enough to get the assignment done. It may not be their best work, but they still get it done. And so maybe not everybody knows. Obviously, they know. You may know or you may not. And the teacher doesn't know because the assignment's turned in on time. So they're functional. On the other hand, the dysfunctional procrastinators are kids that wait until the last minute, Thursday night, but despite best efforts, they cannot focus well enough to get it done. And everybody knows they're stressed out. You probably know about it, and their teacher absolutely knows about it because they didn't turn it in, and their grades reflect it. Now, we might think, oh, functional, not so bad. But what I found in working with kids through college is that functional procrastination often becomes dysfunctional procrastination for two reasons. The work gets harder, it's more complex, and the assignments are not just something you can do in, one night. They require multiple days of effort. So we want to break this cycle that often happens to kids. The problem is that when we think of procrastination, as parents, we think, oh, my kid's procrastinating because they don't want to do this. But the reality is actually a little bit more complicated. So I want to share something really fun. You can do this yourself. You can do it with your kids. I think it's a great tool. We do this with kids, and usually one of the first sessions when we meet with them, if this is an issue for them. And so it's basically a little quiz. It's a fun quiz that allows kids to determine their style. Like, why is this happening? And the reason this is important because the way in which you're going to help the student completely depends on their style. It's not a one-size-fits-all approach. So if you would like this, same place I mentioned before, ectutoring.com/webinar-resources. Okay, so it's a 12-question quiz, and it's going to break it down to 6 styles. I have enough time, so I'm going to talk about each style real quick and then just give a couple of examples. Okay, so the first style, this is a very, very common style. It's kind of like the kid I mentioned before, can't start unless they're in crisis mode. Their back is against the wall, their adrenaline's flowing, and then they can get to work. So they kind of need external accountability because they don't have the self-motivation to get started until the last minute. And it kind of makes sense because their brain is looking for this spike of dopamine that makes them feel like, oh, okay, now I'm in a good mood, I can do it. The problem with this approach is that crisis makers believe this is the only way I can do my work. I have to wait until the last minute to muster the energy. And that's simply not true. It is a learned habit. So here are some strategies. 1, an accountability partner. It could be you if you have a really young child. It could be the kid who says, hey, Susie, somebody in the class, let's work on this study guide together at 4 o'clock tomorrow. It could be a timer, which I'm going to show you in a second. And by the way, we're accountability partners for kids. And it can also be like, where are you going to work? Because we know that procrastination is heightened when kids have a distractible setting. So if they have their phone at their table or the TV going on, they might be better in the library, after school at Starbucks, another place in your house that's maybe different than where they typically do their work. I think timers are amazing tools. I just totally love them. I've used them for kindergartners, I've used them for college students, and we use them in sessions. You want to use a timer in a couple of ways. 1, if your child just needs to get going. So they're hemming and hawing. I don't want to do this math homework. You know what? Let's just set the timer for 10 minutes and work as best you can just for those 10 minutes. During this time, should be as much distraction-free as possible. Now, you can also use a timer for a longer swath of time, like 25 minutes. This is called the Pomodoro method. You can look it up. It's really fabulous. It's based on research that says when working alone, that's like your max attention. Not for like a first grader, but more for an older student, a middle school or a high school or college student. And then you take a break. I have found timers to be incredibly successful with kids because it makes them feel successful. And we'll have discussions with them after. How did that feel? What did you get done? What worked for you? And they feel successful because they've been far more productive using a timer than like La La Land and left to their own devices. But it can't just be like you run to the store and buy a timer, or you fish it out of your junk drawer and say, hey, use this timer. It needs to be done consistently, and kids need to be able to talk about it. So the discussion and the repetition is what makes it stick. So those are crisis makers. Defiers are kids that have difficulty with authority. They're very personality specific. They like one teacher and they're willing to do the work for that teacher. They can't stand another teacher and they're defiant. They won't do the work. And so when we work with these kids, it's really important that we help them to understand another person's perspective, especially their teachers, through asking powerful questions, which I'll share with you first in a second. Also, these kids, they do not do well when you have control, when you have all the control as the parent. So instead of saying, you need to start this right now, you might say, what time do you think would be a good time to get started on this? These kids also need a lot of sand. They need downtime. So I would recommend building in even a procrastination block for them. And then another strategy I've found to be helpful with our students is to say, like, especially when we're introducing a new strategy, or even when we're working on math and they're super stuck and we want to show them a different way, we'll say, I don't know, this might work for you, it might not. And all of a sudden they're like, oh, what is it? And that turns out better than you need to do it this way. All right, so let's go back to those powerful questions I mentioned. Situation. Paper due on Friday, the rough draft is due on Wednesday. And the student says, I don't need to turn in a rough draft. That's stupid. I'll just turn in the final copy on Friday. So we'll say, could your teacher's feedback on that rough draft be helpful in getting the grades you want? So powerful questions help kids to think differently and definitely to understand the teacher's perspective. Here's the overdoer. This tends to happen more with older students. People pleaser, hard time saying no. We always want them to prioritize their own rocks first and have language to talk to their friends that try to suck them into doing other things. Oh, let me think on that. I'll get back to you later. Because often they agree to do so many things with their friends and even in a class that they don't prioritize their own things. It often happens in group projects. And so we'll work with kids to say, let's come up with language for delegating. Oh, Yvonne, you are so good at research. How about if you do this research section of the project? Does that sound about right? So that's the overdoer. We also have the dreamer. These kids assume everything will be okay. They're kind of happy-go-lucky. They don't love details, and they're not too worried. Now, what often happens as these students get older is they realize that this attitude is not conducive to getting their work done on time and getting best grades. So they start to compensate for it. And so what often happens is dreamers will say, okay, I'm going to do better next time. I'm going to get started on this right away, and I'm going to work on this and not be doing things at the last minute. And that's what they'll do. They'll start out strong, but then they kind of drop it and have a hard time following through. It's like a form of time blindness in a way. And so we work with kids to backwards plan. Backwards planning means it's due on Friday in 2 weeks. Let's plan out what those steps are going to look like, because it forces dreamers to consider details. Sometimes we'll do body doubling, even, to get kids started for 5 minutes. You work on this, I'll work on this. Let's talk about it. Pomodoros work super well for dreamers, especially the discussion afterwards. The last two types, these kids are fueled by anxiety. So let me start out with the worrier. These kids have a lot of stress and anxiety, but they don't have great executive function skills. And they get so worked up that often they'll be like, oh my God, I can't do this. I'll do it later. And that's when the procrastination comes in. So there's actually a lot of research on what helps kids, especially in testing situations that have anxiety. And we know that when kids are able to get rid of all their fears, we call it a brain dump. And when we're working with kids online, it might be, jot these down on the note cards. Or let's just talk about what the stress is. Or you write your stresses out, I'll write mine. Let's talk. But a brain dump is when you write down all your worries before you start on the assignment. I got a midterm on Friday. I have to get at least an 85% on this to get a B for the quarter. I don't want to disappoint my parents. I have almost all this stuff to do, and I practice every day this week. So when you can brain dump it, it relieves your frontal lobe and it frees it up to work on other things. So a study out of University of Chicago looked at kids that did brain dumps before tests. So anxious kids that did brain dumps and found that anxious kids performed just as well as their non-anxious peers when they use this strategy. Also for warriors, they often think everything's a big deal, and it's not. Everything does not hold equal weight. Let's prioritize your rocks. And then let's take those rocks and break them down into manageable pieces. Sometimes warriors do better with tasks than time, meaning a timer might stress them out. And if that's the case, if your child has rebelled against timers, I wouldn't go there. You can do it a different way. So another strategy we teach the students is, all right, instead of the timer, let's try this strategy. Let's see if it works. Do 5 math problems, take a break, see how you feel, do the next 5. So that's dividing it by task. Take your worksheet, fold it in half. Just do the first part to get started. That's by task. And then our last one is perfectionist. These kids want everything to be perfect. So the goal is just to submit it. Before you start the assignment, let's talk about it. Can you submit this? Yes, I will submit it. Give yourself a timeline and discussing with kids that it doesn't have to be 100%. 80% is perfectly fine. Let's just get it done and turned in. And the other thing I found to be helpful with students is the if-then strategy. It's kind of like looking into the future. It works great with perfectionists and warriors. I was talking to a student we work with who went off to college. It did not go well for him his first semester. So his mom called our office and said, I think he can do the work. It's just that he's not using his time well. He's putting his friends and his social life before his academics. It's just not, it's not going well at all. He has poor grades. He's missing assignments. He doesn't know what to do. And part of what was happening with the student is that he would go to class most of the time, and then he'd go back to his dorm room. And once he got to his dorm room, he just was not motivated to do other things because his roommates were playing Xbox, they were hanging out, and he wanted to do that too. So we started with if then. Okay, if I stay on campus, if I go to the library and get my 2 rocks done, then I can go back to my dorm room and hang out with my friends. So if then works in so many ways, but I really like that strategy for kids. So I'm wondering, do any of these styles relate to you or your child? And then lastly, I wanted to mention that there's certainly an elephant in the room because we can have all the best strategies, but we often think, if our child is resistant, they won't do anything. And we work with resistant kids all the time. Often when parents call and they're worried about their kids and, they're thinking, I'm not sure if my child will buy into this. Their grades are poor, but I know they need this help. Or last year was bad. I'm afraid this year is going to be the same thing. And we will often talk to parents about something called the stages of change, which is based on the trans-theoretical model. And it basically says that when anybody wants to change anything or they need to change something, they go through different stages of change until that change becomes positive and becomes a habit. Sometimes when we see kids, they are not willing to accept help in certain areas. They may be at the bottom of this ladder and they might be in pre-contemplation. no way, I'm not going to change this. I won't change. Sometimes they're like, yeah, I see the problem and I want to make this better. So we have a survey of executive function skills, and the answers to each question, like, do you write your assignments down? Do you have a record of what's due? Or do you regularly use the calendar feature on your homework portal? Yes, it's not a problem for me, or, whatever. There's 4 answers. Basically, I don't have a problem with this at all, to no, I'm actually really good at this. And so we see with each of these skills, where are they really stuck and they don't want the help? And what is the skill where they see the problem and they know they want to change? And that's always where we start. You don't want to start with a thing that the child's like, absolutely not. You want to start with a thing where they're willing to accept some help. It happens all the time. There's always something that's often different than what the parent wants at first, that the student is willing to get help from. Usually it's related to a grade. I have the science test. I want to learn how to study better for it. And so we start there. Eventually, we get to the other things, but not until we build trust and respect and a relationship where they're willing to work with us. And so it takes some time sometimes, but we always get to the other things, like the issue with procrastination, organization, prioritization, because those things are imperative first. So meeting kids where they are is key. So I mentioned this earlier, when we work with kids, it's always using 4 steps, not just teaching the skills, but also helping them get their work done so they can take the strategies and implement them into their work that they have. And not only does that result in better executive function skills, it also results in better grades. And you can learn more on our website about executive functions, ectutoring.com/executive-functions. All this to say is you don't have to go it alone. There is help for you. If you're really struggling, reach out to the Parent Resource Center. It is the most marvelous place. Not every county has a Parent Resource Center like Fairfax County does. The work they do there is second to none. If you're super stuck, you need help with your IP, whatever it is, talk to them and they can guide you in the right direction. Talk to your teacher about it. We're happy to help as professionals because this is what we do. And if we can be of service, you can set up a call to talk to any of our program managers, Kathy, Jennifer, and Ann Stewart. They all specialize in ADHD and executive function. They'll talk to you, you'll share information about your child, and we'll tell you a little bit about our services and see if it's a match. And if not, you will still get some strategies that will help you on your path forward to a really great school year. So you can scan this QR code, or you can just go to our website and see a link to schedule a strategy call. All right, so we're at 10:45 right now. I would love to go to Q&A. If you have a question about anything I've said, or you want to talk to your child, please talk about your child, please throw it in the chat. All right, let's see. Okay.
So, Anne, we had
Yes.
one earlier in
Okay.
Spanish, so I'm just going to translate that for
Sure.
you. Can you recommend a model organization board to fill out, and what is the minimum you should have?
A model organization board, like an assignment notebook?
Probably.
Okay. I found that there are so many assignment notebooks on the market. What I found is that, and I've had students use all different ones. It doesn't necessarily matter which one, it's which one is best for your child. So it's which one that they're willing to use. I've also had success with kids not using a specific assignment notebook, but having just a blank notebook that they write down their assignments, but that they also can write notes themselves. And it could be, this is mine. Obviously, I don't have assignments, but I have things to do. And so a lot of times students will have sometimes half of this size that's super portable. So even if they're not in class, they're somewhere else and they remember, oh, I need to do this, or I need to add this to the list of things I'm going to do, they can use this. So it can be the school issued one. It can be a blank one. if you find that you're fighting with your child over um, using an assignment notebook, then maybe encourage them just to be a list maker. I was talking to a student the other day and said, I refuse. I'm not using an assignment notebook. I can go online and see where my teachers have posted. I see my due dates. So what I use is a list, and I have a running list that I keep by my laptop, and I use that. So again, it's kind of dependent on the student and what they're willing to use.
Okay, so this family member loved all of the tips. The student is a 10th grader. How do you keep your cool as a parent? Because she gets annoyed when they give pushback. And I'm sure my reactions aren't helping them stay on track.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I know. Because some of these kids, the more you push, the more they push back. And like when you're in a power struggle, there absolutely is no winner. And I totally get that. I think what I would do is maybe step back a bit and instead of giving suggestions, try just being a good listener and asking powerful questions. So instead of, for example, like, do you have homework today? You might ask, oh, what's your priority, or what is it that you want to get done today? You might say, instead of how was your day, what was the best part of your day? Do you have anything big coming up this week? I like framing Sunday evenings, or even it could be Saturday mornings. Like once a week, kind of talking to kids about what's your week like coming up. I found that sometimes kids, even 10th graders, we would think like you should be able to do this now, but they don't always. Asking, what do you have on your agenda this week? So it kind of like causes them to think ahead about what they have. They might go online to see what they have going on. And it's not that you're judging them, like, oh wait, you didn't mention that math test. You have that geometry test on Thursday. But instead, really just putting a bug in their mind so they're able to think ahead on their own. Um, what I found is, when we judge kids and we try to tell them what to do and we correct them a lot, that's when they kind of push back. I know for me, both my kids have ADHD, and now my youngest one just graduated from college, and my oldest child is 26. But I noticed myself when I was anxious as a parent, I tended to like, you know, get into their business a little bit more because it was my own anxiety. And it's just something, human nature that we're worried about our kids. So we tend to, become like a taskmaster in a way. So I just try to step back and ask questions. How does your week look? What are your priorities this week? And instead of giving my feedback and trying to fix the situation, I would just try to step back and be a listener. That kind of model is called a coaching model. And so a coaching model for kids, especially older kids, to help them develop self-awareness is often really helpful.
Okay, super awesome info. Thank you. Is there an answer key to help guide discussion after giving the yes/no question quiz that you start your sessions with?
The procrastination quiz,
Yeah.
there's not an answer. There's not like a teacher's guide or anything like that. I did this. I've done this with a lot of kids over the years, but I also did it with one of my own kids. And I said, "Oh, this would be really fun to do. Oh, I don't want to do it. Oh, let's just do it together. Come on, let's just see." And so we both came up with different traits. And I said, "Oh, I'm this. What are you? Oh, you're not that." And it was more like curiosity. "Oh, tell me about that. How does it manifest itself in you?" "Oh, yeah, I have that too." So it's really just a discussion. It's just remember in the beginning, I talked about metacognition, kind of developing self-awareness. That's ultimately where we want kids to go with this type of tool, that they see, oh, okay, I see that in myself. Oh, this is a strategy that can help me. And so, but the first way of going about it is just having a discussion around it and recognizing it. And you could say, what's helped you? Oh, yeah, I had that problem too, and I did blah, blah. Instead of you should do this. That often sounds better to kids.
Okay, what do you suggest doing if kids have elements of different procrastination styles? Mine seems to be a mix of um, crisis maker, worrier, perfectionist, with some overdoer tendencies occasionally thrown in.
Oh gosh, yes. It's kind of like, if you go to the hospital with lots of injuries, they send you to triage, and somebody there is like, okay, let's prioritize what we're going to do first. It's the same thing with kids. Um, so I would think, okay, thinking back to last year, what was the biggest obstacle for us? Um, was it even procrastination, or was it just getting out the door in the morning? Was it organization? And I might think, okay, what's the one thing I can do that's not too intrusive, but that could develop a routine in our family? And so that's how I would think about it. What is really holding my child back the most? It may be a couple things, and then think, where is my child going to is going to accept help from me, or maybe even from somebody else? And that's generally where you start.
Any recommendations for students who are disorganized procrastinators but end up doing well anyway? So good study skills habits aren't happening now, but there are no real consequences. But I know they will need the strategies later in life and would love them to get the practice now.
Yeah, it's likely because the child doesn't have a pain point quite yet. It might be that the work isn't that hard, that the work isn't multi-day assignments. They may not be taking a slew of challenging classes quite yet or at the present time. And sometimes when there's no pain point, it is hard on your own as a parent to elicit change. Usually it's somebody else that can help kids become self-aware and see that this is, even though they don't think it's impacting them, it probably is. There's a ton of research on procrastination. And we know that even when people don't see it as a problem, it does result in lower grades and more anxiety. And so it could be that you have somebody else work with your child, or you could let it go until it becomes a pain point, and then the child is more willing to accept help. But at this point, if I would go in the direction of self-awareness. Oh, you mentioned you have that too. What's something that you could do to get started? So asking them questions to break it down so that you're not telling them what to do, but they may think, oh, I'm going to start earlier, could be key.
What if they don't want to answer those powerful questions and have a conversation? What if they don't want to answer those powerful conversations to have a conversation and instead give you attitude?
Then I would step back. At that point, if something's happened, either that they're, 14 or they're just at a difficult age, there could have been a lot of tension before. It could be that right now, stepping back and maybe not asking those questions, but asking other questions. What was the best part of your day? What would you like for dessert tonight? Questions that don't surround academics, to build back the relationship, just to have meaningful conversations. So I have on Amazon, you can find these on Amazon. I have a bunch of different decks of conversation cards that I've used with kids over the years. I've used them with my own kids. And these are kids that are like, no, I'm not talking to you. I'm just, I'm going to stay in my little bubble. And they're really, really awesome. You can find dinner conversation cards for teenagers, for kids. And they ask questions that kids are, if you could change one rule in school, what would it be? And so these could be questions that you ask over dinner, for example, when you're in the car together. They can be ways to start a conversation. But if you find when you're asking about homework, your child's like super pushing back on you, I would move in a different direction. Stop with that, maybe back off for a while and maybe ask other questions, or maybe just be there and, be a good listener.
How do I help make, how do I inserted that word make. How do I help my child take school more seriously or even try to be more interested? I noticed that her response to how was school today is always boring. When I ask her about homework or to show me what they're working on, she replies, I don't remember.
Mm-hmm.
If it isn't something she's interested in, she tunes out.
Yeah. Motivation is complicated, and there's three things that have to be intact when we think about motivation. One, kids have to feel like they have mastery over the material. Two, they have to have a sense of autonomy. And three, they have to have a sense of purpose. So if your child is, struggling with motivation in school, I would bet that one of those things could be missing. And so I might just change the way of approaching her. And again, as I mentioned, not asking about school, ask about something else. Did you meet up with any friends after school? What did they serve you for lunch? And try to get your child to talk in a different way. And if they won't, it doesn't mean that, we totally back away for a week and don't talk to our child. It means that we just have to switch gears and maybe approach in a different way.
Okay, two more.
Sure.
Any tips on teaching basic organization skills like keeping your binder in order?
Sure. So with your binder, I personally have a lot of success with kids keeping using an accordion folder binder. So it's kind of like a good old fashioned trapper keeper where it has the ring, because a lot of teachers still want kids to hole punch stuff and put them in rings, but it also has an accordion file folder, and you can help your child label each tab with their subject. And every time they get a paper, say they get a science paper, a social studies paper, they just put it in the back of that section. So everything's going to be naturally chronologically organized. And that's better than just having a ringed binder where they're just shoving stuff in. It helps kids with that sense of organization. And then for their backpack, what I'd recommend is, especially if they don't have a ton of stuff yet, helping them to set up a system where this seems common sense to us, I know, but tall things are in the back. And so usually your binder is in the back, and then your anything else you have as it gets smaller is kind of near the front. So then when you open it up, it's easier to see in it. It's easier to find things for them. And it's just easier to keep it tidy.
Okay, last question. My daughter does not have a problem with procrastination on school assignments, but her room and workspace is constantly a mess. We do the clean sweep every few days, but we always end up back in the mess again almost immediately, like the next day or even sometimes the same day. Do you have coaching that provides strategies for chronic messiness?
It's part of what we do, but it's not, it wouldn't be the sole thing. We work mostly with kids on things that relate to their academics. So we teach organization in terms of a system for their digital files, a system for their backpack, for their binder. But if this is their only thing, and she's a really good student, and everything else in her life is perfectly fine, maybe she's just required to keep the desk that she does work at. Let's say it's in the home office, that needs to be tidied every night. But maybe her room is, just once a week and you close the door. I've never found a solution to rooms except to get more hampers and teach kids how to sort like whites and darks. You could say nothing on the floor. So there's lots of things you can do with the room, but sometimes it's not always worth the battle because the student, maybe they just keep their desk neat, and in other areas of their life, they're a high performer. It could be this is, their letdown area. And so I guess I'm saying maybe think, is it a huge deal, or is your child doing okay with a messy room?
All right. Thank you, Anne. As always, it was wonderful. I learned so much each time, and I hope everybody has a good afternoon. Have a good day, everybody.
Thanks, Lisa. Have a great school year, everybody. Take care. Bye-bye.